You're covered in skin that looks like an animal's hide. Not a plant's, an animal's. And that's the first thing unsettling about your story before it even starts. Picture mountains buried in fog so thick it swallows tree branches whole, and not a single ray of sunlight gets through without a permit. Somewhere in there, in that damp silence, thousands of years ago, something was ripening that didn't have a name yet. Something hairy, sour, utterly unremarkable, and yet destined to one day become the face of supermarkets on the other side of the planet. But first, a hook worth holding on to. To become yourself, you had to survive a monkey, a schoolteacher, and an entire geopolitical crisis. And that's just the setup, because you've also got a namesake with feathers, legs, and an attitude, and the only thing you share is fuzzy skin. Your homeland isn't some modest garden out back. It's the valley of the Yangtze, southern China, the mountains of Sichuan and Zhejiang provinces, where the climate is humid, subtropical, and the vegetation so dense that sunlight only reaches the ground in select, almost hand-picked beams. You grew as a wild vine. Yes, a vine, one that wrapped around trees like it didn't trust its own spine to stand up straight. Locals called you Mihu Tao, monkey peach, because monkeys were devouring you long before a single human figured out you were edible. Pause here for a little internal drama, because the first person who tried you probably didn't do it out of gourmet curiosity, but because they watched a monkey scarf you down with pure delight and thought, well, if the monkey didn't die, I probably won't either. So yes, your very first taste test was, essentially, humans copying monkey behavior. Man, the crown of creation, peeking over a primate's shoulder for tips. Ironic, isn't it? For millennia, you were a local curiosity, written up in ancient Chinese medical texts. Yes, you get a mention in texts from the Song dynasty, about 1,000 years ago, as a remedy for digestion and for harmonizing qi. So you weren't dessert, you were medicine. Picture that, 1,000 years of being taken seriously, like a pill, not a sweet little treat before breakfast. Time, however, wasn't in a hurry. It crept past you slowly, like that same humidity in the mountain air, and the Middle Ages rolled onto the historical stage, an era that changed practically everything on the planet except you. Europe was trading feverishly in spices, silk, porcelain. Caravans crossed the deserts along the Silk Road, hauling cinnamon, pepper, nutmeg, silk cloth, gunpowder, paper. Merchants brought home wonders they'd later describe to their grandkids by the fire, embellishing every detail. And you, seemingly the perfect candidate for exotic wonder, fuzzy, strange, filling, never made the cut. Not a single caravan picked you up. The reason is simple and a little insulting. You're not a spice you can dry out and haul for months. You're a moist, delicate, fast-rotting piece of fruit that spoils faster than anyone can haggle over your price at the market. Spices survived the trek across the desert. You wouldn't have made it a week in a sack on a camel's back. So while silk, pepper, and paper were conquering the world, you sat quietly in your mountain thicket, like that modest relative nobody invited to the wedding because, well, he's too high maintenance to transport. Meanwhile, history kept picking up speed and burst into the age of discovery. Sailors set out to conquer the oceans. Columbus brought home potatoes, corn, tomatoes, cocoa. Magellan circled the globe, proving it was round and proving in the same breath that spices were worth dying for. Spanish and Portuguese galleons dragged an entirely new menu across the Atlantic for Europe. Chili peppers, vanilla, turkey. Whole continents were swapping dishes like it was some grand culinary auction. You were absent from that auction too. Not one galleon loaded an actinidia sapling into its hold. Here's a rhetorical question. Isn't it strange that in an era when Europeans hauled the tomato, cocoa, and potato out of the Americas, you, a fruit that grows literally in Asia, a place they were sailing to as well, just fell off the itinerary? To the sailors hauling spices and tea and silk, you weren't interesting. You didn't have a sharp aroma worth its weight in gold. You weren't a drug like tobacco. You didn't keep in a barrel like rum. You were just a fruit, tasty, but economically boring for an age-chasing profit, not vitamins. So while the ship's holds groaned under tea, cinnamon, and silk, and conquerors carved up continents like a birthday cake, you stayed in the shadows of the Sichuan mountain forests, unnoticed, and unclaimed. You outlasted the fall of dynasties, Mongol conquests, the age of explorers, colonial wars fought over spices, and not a single historical catastrophe so much as touched you. While entire empires rose and fell over control of pepper and silk, you just kept growing up in the mountains, like that quiet neighbor who lived through every uprising in the building without once showing up to a protest. Centuries stacked up on each other, like leaves falling and rotting into a new layer of soil, and you stayed exactly the same. Wild, sour, hairy, needed by absolutely nobody outside China. You weren't trying to conquer the world. The world didn't even know you existed. Now let's rewind even further. Your ancestors belonged to the genus Actinidia, and scientists say plants in this genus have been around for millions of years, back when creatures roamed the earth that modern botany textbooks wouldn't even recognize. You're a botanical old-timer who simply decided not to advertise your age. Like some introverted celebrity, you've got over 50 relatives in the Actinidia family, and most of them still grow wild in the forests of East Asia, untasted, unappreciated by anyone. You got lucky, or rather one specific cultivar, Actinidia deliciosa, got lucky, turning out to be the sweetest and biggest of the siblings. Classic story. In any big family, there's always the one who gets all the attention while the rest quietly grow up on the margins of the yard. Living alongside your wild relatives were pandas. Yes, those bamboo bears, along with Himalayan black bears and, of course, monkeys, who, as we've established, became your first, if unintentional, promoters. Not a single human had yet thought of you as a business model. You were just a node in the food chain. One more leaf in a massive green ecological puzzle. And here's rhetorical question number 2. Do you think a single Tang Dynasty emperor, tasting you at a banquet, had any idea that 1,000 years later, your picture would be plastered on yogurt labels in European supermarkets? Doubtful. Doctors of the time saw you as a cold remedy. Modern marketers see you as a superfood. Same substance, different wrapping. All it took was one single moment you probably didn't even notice, since plants, unfortunately, lack any sense of dramatic timing. In 1904, a school teacher from New Zealand named Mary Isabel Fraser visited China, saw your fruit, and, well, just took a few seeds home with her. That's it. An entire global industry worth billions of dollars today started with one woman's curiosity and a coat pocket. You didn't even get to say goodbye to your homeland. You were just shipped out like a souvenir, right alongside postcards and travel memories. The seeds ended up with a farmer named Alexander Allison, who planted you in Wanganui, New Zealand. And, surprise, the local climate turned out to be an almost perfect copy of your humid subtropical home back in China. You took root so well that locals started calling you Chinese gooseberry. Simple, honest, no frills, and it would have stayed that way, if not for one small detail, called the Cold War. Here's where the drama really kicks in. Mid-20th century, the world split into two camps, and the word Chinese, in the name of a product you're trying to sell to Americans, is, to put it gently, not the greatest marketing strategy. Picture this: an American importer holding a crate of fruit labeled Chinese gooseberry, right in the thick of anti-communist sentiment, tariff walls, and general suspicion toward anything associated with the word China. Good product, toxic name. And then, somewhere around 1959, a New Zealand export company makes a decision that will change your fate forever. Rebrand you. Various names got tossed around, including the truly absurd Melanette. But eventually, someone looked at your fuzzy brown skin and at a small flightless bird that happens to be the national symbol of New Zealand, the Kiwi, and said, why not? That same bird, by the way, is also fuzzy, also brown, also a little awkward looking, and also, funnily enough, native to exactly that country. So a fruit born in China got named after a bird that had never once laid eyes on it in its life. Here's the answer to the question you've probably been waiting for this whole time. Why does the fruit share a name with the bird? Not because the bird laid you, and not because you somehow hatched out of an egg. It's simply that the marketing team was hunting for a name that sounded New Zealand, patriotic, friendly, with zero hint of geopolitical tension. You became the victim, or rather the beneficiary, of a political rebrand. Admit it, not many fruits can say they changed their name because of the Cold War. Bananas never went through that. Neither did apples. And here's sarcastic comparison number one. It's like if a guy named John Ivan Smithenko suddenly became John Smith for image reasons, because it'll sell better overseas. Basically, you're the product of an international PR campaign, dressed up as a natural fruit. Meanwhile, the geographic expansion kicked off, and here you're no longer behaving like some modest vine from the Chinese mountains. You're acting like a full-blown international conqueror, the kind who failed to take over the world in the Middle Ages, but pulled it off in the 20th century instead. No sword required, just shipping containers. New Zealand became your second homeland and your chief publicist. In the 1970s, you started getting exported to the US and Europe, and Americans who'd never even heard of Chinese gooseberry suddenly got curious about this strange fuzzy fruit vegetable with a bright green center and a neat ring of black seeds inside, looking like the rosette on some kind of space-age machine. California picked up the baton next. In the 1960s and 70s, American farmers watching New Zealand's export success figured, why not grow it ourselves? The climate in the San Joaquin Valley turned out to be a good fit, and the US became one of the world's major producers of yew, competing with New Zealand itself, Italy, Chile, and eventually China too. Yes, your original homeland, which eventually started mass-growing yew as well, like it was trying to reclaim something it had once given away for free to one curious schoolteacher. Rhetorical question number 3. Isn't it a little strange that the country you're from is now playing catch-up with its own descendant on the global market? Picture a father competing with his son for the same job at the same company. Awkward, but it happens. Today there are more than 50 varieties of yew, and the most famous, of course, are the classic green with flesh the color of fresh spring grass, and the yellow, gold kiwi, Actinidia chinensis, sweeter, less tart, with smoother skin, a version of yew that's basically been polished up for a pickier crowd. There are even small grape-sized varieties you eat whole, skin and all. No knife required, no ceremony. The New Zealand company Zespri today controls a massive share of the global export market, turning you into a brand every bit as recognizable as any fashion label. Yeah, you've got your own fashion house. The culture around eating you has picked up its own rituals too. In Europe, they slice you in half and eat you with a spoon, like a tiny dinosaur egg. In New Zealand, they garnish pastries with you like no pie has the right to call itself a pie without you on top. The fitness industry declared you a superfood, thanks to your high vitamin C content, higher than an orange's, by the way, which sounds like a personal insult to the entire citrus family. In Thai and Vietnamese cooking, you get tossed into smoothies and salads with hot chili peppers. A contrast that, frankly, works better than it has any right to. And here's sarcastic comparison number 2. You're like that quiet office employee everyone underrated for years, then suddenly got promoted to Superfood of the Month, and now everyone acts like they believed in you all along. But the most interesting part isn't how people eat you. It's how you influence something much bigger than breakfast. Remember that Cold War rebrand? That's not just a marketing anecdote. It's a real historical precedent for how geopolitics can reshape a food product's fate faster than any natural evolution ever could. You became one of the first global examples of rebranding for market survival, a strategy that dozens of other products later copied, from Japanese cars to cosmetics that changed names for Western consumers. Basically, your story became a silent textbook for marketers for decades to come. Worth mentioning one more detail that rarely makes it into the popular retellings. In the 1980s and 90s, as New Zealand's export business exploded, the country built an entire separate economic model around it, a cooperative system that eventually became Zespri, and it's one of the rare examples of a small island nation's farming cooperative, turning a single fruit into a national export, as recognizable as its wine or dairy industry. Picture it. An entire nation's economic identity is partly built on you. A former wild vine from the Chinese mountains that one teacher happened to slip into her coat pocket. Rhetorical question number 4. The last one. How many fruits can say they skipped the entire age of conquest and exploration, then caught up with everyone else in about 50 years, becoming part of an entire country's national brand along the way? Named after an animal it has absolutely nothing in common with, except skin color. Not many, basically none. And here's your final scene, your climax. Picture the mid-20th century. A container of fruit still labeled Chinese gooseberry gets stuck at U.S. Customs. Not over quality, but over the name itself. In the paperwork, right in the thick of the Cold War, the word Chinese raised more red flags than any health inspection ever could. The entire shipment was practically at risk of vanishing from the market over a geopolitical allergy, not taste or quality. The fix didn't come from a lab or a farmer's field. It came from a marketing office, where one signature changed the name, and within a few short years, a product that had nearly been buried by bureaucracy and politics turned into one of the most recognizable fruits on the planet. You didn't survive because you tasted good. You survived because you changed your name at the right moment. And that's your story. Wild, hairy, sour, born in the misty mountains of Sichuan, devoured by a monkey, spied on by a human, ignored by the caravans of the Silk Road, overlooked by the explorers of the Age of Discovery, shipped out by a school teacher, grown by a farmer, and rescued by a marketer in the thick of the Cold War. You went from ancient Chinese medicine to national brand logo, from a nameless fruit that didn't even make it into a galleon's hold, to the namesake of a bird that never once laid eyes on you. And somewhere out there, in the humid forests along the Yangtze, your wild relatives are still growing, unnoticed, with no idea which one of them will someday become the face of supermarkets around the world. And we'll keep tracing these unexpected paths, from forgotten mountain fruit to global brand. If you're curious where the next story takes us, stick around, and subscribing helps you not miss it.